but we don't tend to look at them much afterwards when we are adults. And essentially, these are the same story. Have you ever noticed? The story of the fiery furnace, the story of the lion's den, it's all the same story. If you compare them, they each have the same points in common with slight differences. So you start to think, well, you have these people in exile, and they are serving at high levels. Things keep happening. The first thing that happens in both stories, almost the first thing, is that a call to idolatry is made into law, which obviously causes a problem. Now, if we look at chapter 3 of Daniel, we find, and just to remind you, when last we were in Daniel, we found Daniel interpreting a dream for Nebuchadnezzar. Now we find Nebuchadnezzar says, made an image of gold, set it up on the plain of Dura, and sent to gather all of his satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, all the officials of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. And then all of these people gathered for this dedication, and they stood before the image, and the announcement is made. You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of all these musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Now, there is some speculation that this statue was a direct result of the vision, where Nebuchadnezzar had been the golden head, the king that no one would top in quality, but now we have an entire image of gold, as if, some commentators say, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, there will be no one after me. So the situation is set up. Here's the statue, here are the people. When you hear the noise of the music, you bow down and worship. If you don't bow down and worship, you get burnt. All right, that's the setup for that. Flip over to chapter 6. Chapter 6 has something very similar. You have a political situation. Darius the Mede has taken over the kingdom, and he is establishing all sorts of officials. And above all but a few, we have Daniel. We'll skip over the first bit to go to the second bit, because nothing changes. The same situation keeps arising. We have a law that for 30 days, no one should make any sort of prayer or petition to any god or man except the king. If they do not obey this law for 30 days, they will be cast into the den of lions. Now, there is an element in this, right, of jealousy. Oh, and Denise wants everybody to know that she's saying hello on chat. Because there is an element of jealousy in this. Now, in the Nebuchadnezzar story, he is the one who initiates the law for idolatry. That's just the kind of guy he is. But at the time, it says, if you go to chapter 3, verse 8, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Now, if you remember, the last time we heard anything about Chaldeans, it was in connection with the king's dream. He said, tell me the dream and the interpretation. And all of these wise men, known as Chaldeans, said, oh, no, you tell us the dream and we'll tell you the interpretation. And so they were all on the brink of death when Daniel steps forward and says, God can explain this dream for you. Now, I don't know if it's just because they figured Daniel was in too high a favor with Nebuchadnezzar. But who are they accusing? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's 3 friends. Now they're like, certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. You see, hear the little bit of jealousy there. They pay no attention to you. They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. Nah, nah. Like I said, though, nothing changes. You go all the way down to Darius the Mede in chapter 6, and you have all of the other government officials seeking a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, because he was distinguished above all the others. It says an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now, they hadn't worked this long and stuck it out in government service this long to be pushed aside by some guy who doesn't even take bribes. And they said, I love this, it says, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. And I would love for that to be true of every believer. That if anyone wanted to persecute us, the only way they could do it was in connection with our obedience to God. That they could find no other fault in us except that we did not join with them in worshiping other things. But such was the case with Daniel. And I think it's interesting that they all knew this. It makes me wonder what the backstory is on this. How many of them had approached him for some sort of corrupt dealing and been turned away or reported for it? That suddenly there's this unanimous agreement, we've got to get rid of this guy. So you have a call to idolatry made into law. You have malice against God's people in exile because of their faithfulness to the one true God. And then you have the consequence, the crisis, if you will. Go back to chapter 3, and they are brought, the 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are brought before the king. And he says to them, is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Let's prove it. If you're ready when you hear the music to fall down and worship, fine. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Funny you should ask. In the other story, though, in chapter 6, we have a very odd twist. We have Darius the Mede, king of this entire empire, much distressed, and he set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored until the sun went down to find a way to rescue him. And it's interesting, right? In the one case, the king is furious because they are not bowing down to his image. In the other case, the king is frantic, trying to find a way to save him because, let's admit it, he's been duped. He didn't think this one through very well. But look at what the others say, right? Now, it's one thing if you are in a large crowd to abstain from bowing down. There's another thing, though, when you are the only three standing in front of the king, and he's got that eye on you, that eye that says, go ahead, try me. But the three friends, they answer and say to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, in other words, if you throw us into the furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver." They're answering the question, what kind of God can save you? Our God can. And he will deliver us out of your hand. But even if not, let it be known to you, O king, we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. That takes nerve. But did you hear what they said? He can. But will he? There's this choice in both cases between something that looks like safety and obedience. In Daniel's case, he hears the law and goes straight home, opens up his windows looking toward Jerusalem, and prays like he always does. There is always that question, though. God can deliver us, no doubt. But will he? This is the bit that we don't really dwell much on in Sunday school with little kids. Because in these stories, God does. He does triumphantly. But when you grow up, when you've seen more of the world, you understand. There are times, and this is true throughout Christian history, even throughout the Old Testament, you'll see times when God allows his people to go through intense suffering for his own purpose. And that spirit of saying, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. And he will deliver us. But it might not be in the way we expect. It might not be in the comfortable way. It may not be saved from the fire, but saved through the fire. And in this case, this is kind of what it looks like, because there is no great intervention that stops them from being dragged to the furnace. In fact, I think their first inkling that God was going to deliver them through the fire was that when they were being dragged there, the people dragging them drop dead from the fire, and they don't. But that leads us to God does his own way of deliverance for his own purposes. In the case of the fiery furnace, it is this hilarious moment where you see this vengeful king staring down into the furnace. He's like, "Aha, I have won." And a few minutes pass, he's like, guys? And his followers come up and he's like, check me if I'm wrong, but didn't we throw 3 tied up into the fire? And they're all like, True, king, we did. You're right on that one. And he says, I see 4. They're not tied up. And they're walking around in the middle of the fire. You can almost see, it's like all of a sudden everybody else comes up and, okay, this is weird. God has their attention. So he goes down as near as he can get safely to the furnace entrance and shouts for them to come out. Come out and come here. And the funny thing is that they just walk right out. Good morning, king. And everyone, all of his people, start circling around them, and they're like, all right, no singed hair. Your clothes, not singed. The best part is they didn't even smell like burning. And anyone who has sat within 20 yards of a campfire knows, if nothing else, they should have smelled like smoke. But they didn't. And Nebuchadnezzar says, this is an amazing turnabout. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. And you can see in this what was God's purpose for delivering these men. It was a direct answer to that question, who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? God says, I am. So we end with a decree. We started with a decree in that story. We end with a decree in this story. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And he promoted them. Well, so much for those guys who thought they were going to open up some slots in the government by pointing out that these guys weren't obeying. If you look at chapter 6, though, things go slightly differently. Same overarching storyline, right? We have the call to idolatry. You can only pray or petition to the king for 30 days. You have the same threat of violent death, that anyone who does not obey this command will be thrown into a den of extremely hungry and extremely aggressive lions. You have the same malice. They're trying, this entire thing is a setup to get rid of Daniel, because they know the only fault they're going to find with him is if they make his faith illegal. And of course, it goes exactly as they planned. Daniel says when he knew the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. In this case, it says they came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. And then they came near and said before the king, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And of course, the king, not realizing how badly he's been duped yet, says, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Side note, this is true. In the Medo-Persian Empire, when the king said something, it stood. And now a king could offer sort of a counter injunction, but from what I've read, that would be admitting you were wrong, and it happened only very rarely because you can't show weakness when you're the king of the Medo-Persian Empire. And so he says, yes, this stands firm. We cannot revoke it for 30 days, etc., etc. Why do you ask? And they answered and said before the king, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah. Now you have to remember, at this point, Daniel has been a government official through the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and I believe his son and his grandson, so quite some time. And yet they still refer to him as Daniel, who is one of the exiles of Judah. And it says, he pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction you've signed, but still makes his petition to his God 3 times a day. And of course, this is that moment when the penny drops for Darius. The king, when he heard these words, was much distressed, set his mind to deliver Daniel, labored till the sun went down, but the men came by agreement to the king and said to him, know, O king, it is a law of the Medes and Persians. You remember you just said this, that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Don't they just sound so smug? We have designed the perfect trap, and not even you can get him out of this, O king, with all due respect, etc. So the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. And the funny thing is the last words of a king to the people being thrown to their deaths are so different. In the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they say our God is able to deliver us. But here it's Darius who says, may your God deliver you. And the stone is laid over the mouth of the den. It's sealed with the signet of the king and his lords, so that, again, law of the Medes and Persians cannot be changed concerning Daniel. And the king goes to his palace and spends the night fasting. Now, this is an absolutely remarkable thing for a man like him. He fasts, he doesn't eat, he doesn't accept any entertainment, and he doesn't sleep. He's up all night fretting about Daniel. And at the break of day, it says, so soon as it's light in the sky, he hurries back to the den of lions. And it says he cried out. Now you have this picture, this incredible contrast. Nebuchadnezzar comes to the mouth of the furnace, but he's all like, all right, I don't get what's going on. You guys come out of there. And here you have Darius, and it says he cried out in a tone of anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? You can almost hear this like, little echoey voice from underneath the stone. O king, live forever. And the king probably like drops to his knees in relief because, I mean, he can talk. That's a good sign. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. He doesn't have to tell Darius this. Darius totally knows. But he's bearing testimony to the fact that worshiping his God has not, in the least, caused any loss to the king. Quite the contrary. So the king was, it says, exceedingly glad. And he commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den, which is probably something that he has never had to say before. Never been able to say before. And we get this feeling because those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought with their entire peoples, dropped down into the den, and before they hit the floor, these lions, who must have been extremely frustrated all night, kind of like that when you teach the dog to put something on its nose that's edible and hold it, and you can see they're just like, I want to eat this, I want to eat this, I want to eat this. These are these lions. They've been sitting there staring at Daniel all night, and they can't do a thing about it. And before the accusers touched the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them, and it says, and broke their bones all in pieces. Now, God delivered in this case in a remarkable way, right? Through the lion's den. And the outcome, the witness of this deliverance, is in a letter that Darius writes and distributes to his entire empire. I make a decree, and you remember about the decrees, they can't be changed, that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Now, you would expect to hear something like that, for example, in the Psalms, right? Or as a sort of an excerpt in the history of the kingdom of Israel, where, something great has happened and one of God's people creates this song of praise. But look who's writing this. Darius the Mede, king of the Medo-Persian Empire. And it said, this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian after him. A small reminder that Daniel never goes home. When he is taken as a young man, it's permanent. But he also, if you know anything about these names of these kings, you'll know that Cyrus is the one who begins the process of returning Israel back to Jerusalem. So Daniel lives at least to see the king and serve the king who is going to put God's people back in their land and rebuild the temple. Daniel was not put where he was without reason or by accident. And even though he does not get to go home again, I can't help but believe that his service to these kings contributed to God's plan to restore his people. And we ask God all kinds of things when we pray. And oftentimes it is for deliverance from something. We ask for deliverance from travel dangers, for deliverance from disease, injury. And a lot of times we fall into the mindset that if God doesn't spare us from the experience, then he has not delivered us. But what do we know? Now, I am going to encourage you to open up the chat box and think of one time that God has obviously delivered you, but through loss. That he has had you go through, not around, not over, and has brought you through. Now, I can think of one right off the bat. Both of my parents are in the high-risk demographic for coronavirus. They are actually listening in with us right now. After a very long quarantine period, they're both actually well. And that was a really scary thing. Not them getting well, No. Wondering how God is going to deliver through this. Because, I haven't got a very big family. There's only 5 of us. But God delivered through. Not from, through. Has anybody else had a moment like that? I know this is a kind of a hard thing to chat, so if it's too much to type, you can actually unmute and talk. That might be easier. That's true. Robin says her present form of employment wouldn't have been her first choice, but there is massive opportunity for service there. There is incredible need, and she is positioned perfectly to bear witness to God's compassion, to be God's hands and feet to people who deep need. Oh, I hear somebody has unmuted.
Well, I was also going to add, in fact, I had to be laid off from a previous job in order to be put in that position. So that wouldn't have been my first choice either.
Yes, being laid off is not the kind of thing that you think, all right, so God is going to bring something great out of this. It's like, no, I have just lost my income. What do I do now? Oh, yeah, I was actually thinking about that, the Towers House fire. I remember hearing the story of where are the children? And that drive to get to the house that you almost probably can't even remember. That is one of those moments where you're like, talk about through the fire. We have these times, and I have to say, praise God, being where we are at the time we are, we don't have as many as other people do. You find out from all over the world that people go through horrendous beatings, having their homes burned down, being driven out of their home villages, all because they have chosen to belong to God, to obey Him, and to spread the gospel. And God, they will testify, God brings us through, but it's not in the way we would say He has, delivered us. And if you look at Paul, he talks about all the things that he has been through. Let me see if I can find that one. But he's been beaten this many times. He's been stoned this many times. He's been shipwrecked. He's been in danger on land, sea, whatever. And God has brought him through every time. And he was like, I am triumphant. And we're like, no, you are unlucky. Because we would think that, right? That's the natural conclusion. Somebody has suffered that much. Man, they're unlucky. But what was his point of view? God has delivered me, and He will continue to deliver me. To him, it was not the suffering that mattered. It was God's power at work in his life. And from a point of safety, that's actually a really scary thing to think. That what matters is not our comfort, our safety, our ability to say, nothing will touch me. What matters is How will God show his power in my life? And of course, we have these triumphant examples: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel. And we know that God does sometimes show incredible power for his glory, not so much for our comfort. But still, we have that statement: our God is able. But even if he does not, we will not bow down to anyone else. We will not worship anyone else. And I think that is of uncomfortable pertinence to us. To be able to say that. I hope we can. So we've hit the end of our time today. If you have any remarks or questions, you've got my email in the directory, so let me know. And I will post the recording of this meeting on the class website, on the church site. And I hope to see you again soon.
Denise wanted to make sure everyone heard her greetings. Hello, she's our official greeter this morning.
Oh. You guys.